On November 20th, 2008, the National Institute of Standards and Technology released their final report on the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. Building 7 was not hit by a plane, but collapsed at about 5:30 on September 11th, 2001. The report is available at the NIST website on the screen. The report contains two computer simulations of what might have happened to Building 7. One simulation shows how WTC 7 might have collapsed because of fires and damage due to falling debris. NIST explains the mystery of Building 7 as a progressive collapse in the interior, as we would expect from a fire collapse, but a simultaneous collapse of the outer shell or facade. Does the simulation look anything like the videos? No, it does not. So what good is it? We have all heard the story of the emperor's new clothes. In that story, the scam was that only the smart people were able to see his expensive new clothes. Too many of us assume that if we can't see how the simulation resembles the videos, we must be stupid. We noticed several unexpected things about the NIST video. First, according to the simulation, the internal structure of WTC-7 collapsed, leaving an outer shell or facade. According to NIST, it is the collapse of this shell or facade that we see in the collapse videos we have all watched. If the NIST simulation were correct, wouldn't we expect to see some damage to the facade? We see several broken windows, but nothing suggesting that beams and floors are falling to the basement. The NIST simulation shows Building 7 leaning toward the west. In reality, the building remained straight as it fell until it tipped towards the south at the last second. Surprisingly, the simulation ends about 2 seconds after the northwest corner of the main roof starts to drop. Naturally, one wonders why. We can imagine how the simulation would finish, and we can play with the simulation images to approximate the rest of the collapse. When we do, we remember immediately that the collapse scenario that NIST has simulated is totally incompatible with free fall acceleration. NIST has now admitted that free fall happened, largely because of David Chandler's work. The problem is, a building cannot collapse at free fall acceleration unless something gets the lower supporting structure out of the way. A building that collapses while crushing its supporting structure cannot drop at free fall acceleration. Perhaps this fact explains why NIST ended their simulation early. They did not want to address the issue of free fall acceleration. NIST would have us believe that once steel loses some of its strength, it loses all of its strength, and that once the steel weakens to the point where it can no longer hold up the building, it turns to spaghetti or linguine or your favorite pasta. That's wrong. Steel buildings are not held up by steel cables that snap when they are overloaded. A better analogy would be springs, like the springs in your car. Springs compress and give way when overloaded, but they do not lose all their strength merely because we put too much weight on them. The springs in my pickup truck cannot support an elephant, but they would not disappear if an elephant climbed in the back. In high school physics, we all learned about gravitational potential energy. We learned that energy equals mgh, that is, mass times the force of gravity times the height. And of course, the force of gravity is g, 9.8 newtons per kilogram. The point is, there is only so much gravitational potential energy stored in any stationary object, such as a building. The only way an object can drop to the ground at free fall acceleration is if all of the gravitational potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. If some of the gravitational potential energy is used to do other work, such as crushing steel, then the object cannot drop at free fall acceleration. Controlled demolitions are one way a building can drop at free fall acceleration for a short time. If segments of supporting beams are removed by explosives, then the building will drop at free fall acceleration until the undamaged floors hit the ground. Then the building will no longer accelerate as quickly, or perhaps not at all, because it is doing work crushing the undamaged floors. NIST assures us that their simulation is based on evidence from videos of the Building 7 collapse. Apparently, NIST looked at some videos that the rest of us have never seen. The NIST simulation simply does not resemble the actual collapse that we all have seen on several videos. The simulation is based on assumptions about fires and damage done by the falling North Tower. The simulation shows us what would have happened if fires had weakened the vertical support columns to the point where they collapse. This is a useful exercise precisely because it predicts a collapse very different from the one that actually happened. If theory and reality disagree, then the theory must change. Suppose NIST is right. We still have to explain how the shell collapsed to free fall. If we assume the shell was very weak, we could understand why it dropped at free fall acceleration. However, if it was so weak, how did it survive undamaged as the interior collapsed? Next, NIST simulated what might have happened if a bomb had gone off in WTC-7. The purple bomb crater shows the damage that one bomb would have created. NIST correctly notes that if the building had been brought down by bombs, the explosions would have been heard all over lower Manhattan. Of course, many people have suggested that Building 7 was brought down by a controlled demolition. But controlled demolitions do not use bombs like the ones that the Air Force planes dropped during a war. Controlled demolitions use cutter charges, relatively small amounts of explosives, on top of a shaped piece of copper. When the explosive detonates, the copper turns into a gas, actually called a plasma, and that plasma cuts through steel like steam cutting through ice. This argument is called beating a straw man. In other words, refuting an argument that no one has made instead of refuting the real argument that people have made. If the NIST had wanted to be honest, they would have simulated the damage caused by cutter charges like those used in controlled demolition.